Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Oro Muscles, and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Oro Muscles revolutionizes rehabilitation with real-time actionable insights into muscle activity with live biofeedback and instant analysis, which has made a huge impact in my work with athletes. For more on Oro, be sure to check out oromuscles.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. Today I'm joined by Dan Blackburn from NTC Hockey. Dan and I are going to be diving into considerations for long-term athlete development, in particular in the youth athlete. This was a great episode, and I really appreciate Dan's time. Enjoy. Dan, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, buddy, my pleasure. It's been a long time coming. We're back and forth chatting and glad that we're able to do this.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. And I mean, huge shout out to our guy Brad for getting us connected that way there. I know he's been a huge influence on both of us over the past several months that way. But for people who maybe don't know you as well as I do or as Brad does, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing things that you're doing in the performance space and the hockey space and so on that way?
Yeah, thanks. I think my greatest accomplishment is being a dad. I've done a lot of great things in the business world and in the sports performance world, but being a dad to two amazing daughters, it's a lesson every day. I'm learning about me. So shout out to Taylor and Allie, and then my partner, Stephanie. I had an athlete ask me one time, like, how can I become a better athlete? And I said that the relationships you build will dictate what you can create. And so my partner, I work as hard on that relationship as anything else. And then in my business world, I founded national training centers, NTC Hockey on all the platforms 26 years ago, August of 1998. I had this crazy idea to train hockey players. We're here in Toronto, Canada, where hockey, like the Mecca. People might argue that Ontario, Canada is the Mecca of all Canada, but let's say that somewhere in the ecospace of hockey, Canada is somewhere high on the map. And so deeply seated in the hockey world, I played a lot myself growing up and a lot of great experiences and some not so great experiences. And so when I was in my mid-20s and was bodybuilding and went to university and then graduated and I was thinking about what's this next chapter of my life. And I tell this story because, it's important to all players that, we'll meet people in our lifetime that will at least present us with an opportunity to course correct and change. And it was a gentleman by the name of Neil. I was a bouncer in a club. And he said to me, Dan, you coach kids at hockey. You work at the bar till 2 a.m. You're on the ice at 5 a.m. You're doing this consistently, like you love it. Have you ever thought of training hockey players? And I thought, Neil, come on, that's a ridiculous idea. Like no one's doing it, right? So my brain, well, no one's doing it. And I walked around that night and I kept thinking, well, I wonder why no one's doing it. Well, maybe I could do it. And anyways, I got myself to a point where I figured I would try it. And I was coaching a team, little house leaguers, little 8, 9-year-olds. I loved being at the rink. They loved me being around. We had, a pretty competitive team, and house league spectrum. And I reached out to a friend of mine who owned a gym, a powerhouse gym here in the Toronto area. And I said, hey, Steve, can I borrow the gym? Can I go in after hours on a Sunday? We'll lock it up, turn the alarm off and shut the lights off, but we're done. But just be in for an hour. And he's like, dude, if you're doing that for your hockey team, I'm all in. Here's the keys. And National Training Centers, or NTC Hockey, was born. Those hockey players within a very short period of time. And I just did basic human mechanic movements. Like I was amazed at even back then, how many young kids couldn't do a body squat and how many couldn't get proper thoracic spine extension. And I'm like, what? These kids are 8 and 9. Like they want to be like the Mecca hockey player. And their limitations on some of the body's most basic functions was like mind blowing. And so I started with them and we did simple, basic things, fun, little obstacle course action, but a lot of ground-based, close-train movements, super controlled, body lunges. Guys, think of a hockey skate. Let's just get into a lunge. What are all the positions you can get into in a lunge? Let's play with it. Let's put a stick in your hand. Let's get your gloves on. Let's really start to get your brain and body into what you would experience on the ice. Let's just do it in the dry land setting. And so that from there, I mean, at Springboard, I wasn't long after that I was looking for my own space. And then Westwood Arena in Toronto, Ontario is where we call home. Yeah. And here we are, 26 years later, there's not many players that have made it to the NHL that grew up in the Toronto area that I haven't worked with at some level, in some capacity over the course of their development time. And what I'm most proud of is it's that 8 to 16 year gap. That's our sweet spot. That's where we're at our best. I mean, we do a lot of great work with collegiate players, and we're all over that. But the 8 to 16, what I believe, we have the ability to not only teach proper mechanic and function, but we get to teach habits. We get to have the conversation like you and I were talking before off camera of like, training sometimes, a lot of times, is boring AF. Like, there's not a lot of excitement, enthusiasm to get in and grind through another core or another isometric workout. Like, it's taxing on the body, and it takes a long time to see results. We always get a kick out of the 8 and 9-year-olds after 2 workouts. They come in and like, I took my shirt off today, and like, I'm really starting to see the difference. And of course, we're like, yeah, like, if you're feeling that body, you got a little bit of delayed onset muscle soreness going on, and that makes you then great. Then let's ride that wave. But we build the habits physically, mentally in those kids in that age group. So by the time they get to 14, 15, 16, and the players that are ready to evolve onto junior hockey and collegiate hockey and beyond, we've helped establish such a firm foundation of what proper training is and what the mental part of the game is, of evolving good times, bad times, wins, losses, successes through the continuum. And we call it the system versus the process. And we teach the process. Control what you can control. Show up on the 2-3 days a week, do the work, and good things are going to happen. And you're going to end up achieving something that in a lot of cases you may have thought was never possible.
I think, as you mentioned, having that solid foundation to build off of is absolutely essential. And it's so interesting to me because it seems like everyone in this sports performance and sports rehab space wants to work with like the pro guys. Like, they're obsessed with like the best of the best. And a lot of them don't understand how they got there in the first place, or what it takes to actually deconstruct that or reverse engineer how you take someone who's 7, 8, 9 years old and develop them long term to the point where 20 years later they're playing in the league and they're still in the league at that point. And, you mentioned family first there. I couldn't help but think, as you were talking about, what kind of things you would want your own daughters to experience from a strength and conditioning and performance standpoint. Because I'll be honest with you, Dan, I look at the world that we live in sometimes nowadays, especially with the Instagram culture, Instagram side of things, and it just gets scary to me, the kind of training that some of these kids are going through and experiencing. And a lot of times I'm seeing parents, in other parts of the country in particular, shelling out hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month for training where, the coach is getting all the exercises off Instagram the day before. And it really, really bothers me that, we're so obsessed with trying to do these cool things that we see pros doing online. And we think that that's what it's going to, that's the magic key or magic formula to get our next generation there. When in reality, I think you and I both know a lot of times it's just the simple, boring, monotonous things done really, really well over and over and over again that actually have the most lasting impact. I mean, I think that basketball is a great example of that. You look at guys like Steph Curry. Like, Steph Curry hits 3-pointers all day long, yet he still goes out and practices them. Maybe he doesn't have to, but he does. I'm sure he gets tired of taking the same shot thousands and thousands of times, but he still does it. We had Josie Holloman on the podcast a few weeks ago. She's a D1 field hockey athlete. She's on the USA U21 team, and she talked about how she does these simple drills over and over and over again. And it's like, there's nothing fancy about it. You're not going to find it on Instagram. It's just simple things done really, really well. And I think that we're becoming so obsessed with trying to like create something that catches people's eyes that we forget about, what it actually takes to get them there in the first place.
Yeah, I'm just writing some things down here because a lot of what you're saying is triggering some thoughts. So first thing, to all the athletes out there, whatever sport you're playing, just because a pro athlete or a collegiate athlete is doing it, number one, doesn't mean it's right. And probably more importantly, doesn't mean it's right for you. right? And so, I mean, to all your listeners, I mean, let that sink in for a second. Doesn't mean that it's right, and it doesn't mean it's right for you. So at least the watershed moment for me, for us, is when we have our pro athletes. I know what they've gone through. I know what their course correction has been ongoing. What we're doing with them as a 27 or 32 or 40-year-old athlete is not applicable to the 14 or 12 or 11-year-old, even though it looks really cool. But we may be doing that thing because of a limitation. That may be some sort of contraindication that we're connected to it. Or maybe they've evolved to a place where they're able to achieve that or do that move. So that's number one. It's not always right, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you. And number two, can we please understand that sometimes less is more, right? Like, to the parent, to the player who thinks that running 5K is the thing, then maybe if 5K is the thing, maybe I'll just add on an extra couple K. And at the end, we'll do a couple of fartlek sprints and we'll do some interval training. Like, our bodies are not designed to be, look, I love David Goggins. I love listening to his stuff, but sometimes you don't have to carry the boats. Sometimes your job on that day is to purposely not carry the boat. Like, it's in your best interest that day to do something different. And therein lies the challenge, I think, for a lot of strength coaches and a lot of teams, is how do we build programming that's unique for players and especially in the team environment? Well, it's hard, but it's your effing job. It's your job. Like, you talked about hundreds, thousands of dollars. We have players at our center that come in and train. They're all on, some of them might be doing similar, but they're all on different programs. Everybody's got their own log. You might be 11 and he's 11. He's a defenseman. You're a defenseman. You're on the same team. Like, in to the outside, you may be identical, but you're not. This 11-year-old has 2.5 years of training. You've just started. So understand that, to the strength trainers and coaches, it is hard, but you have to build it and you've got to create it. And a lot of our collegiate athletes, I'm constantly sending them their workouts. Like, we'll talk about ISOFIT in a minute. We've got a couple of guys that are playing D1 hockey. We gave them an ISOFIT. We take it from the floor, take it with you, and I'm sending them there, and their strength coach is giving them stuff to do, but I'm giving them because I know what they need, and I know the work that they have to do, the little tiny boxes that they have to check, because the details matters. And back to my point, is that a lot of times I'm giving them less to do less better. You'll actually, in a lot of cases, be able to produce significantly better results.
Yeah, you hit on so many amazing things as you were talking there, Dan. And it's interesting to me that this is not the standard in our profession. Why is it that the standard is not individualized attention to athletes, and instead we're trying to put them all on the same program and expect them all to get great outcomes? Every athlete is different and unique. We can't funnel every circle-shaped object into a square-based hole, right? So if we're trying to put everyone on the same program and expect they're all going to get great, we're just asking for trouble. We really need to individualize it, because, as you mentioned, every athlete moves a little bit differently. They're built a little bit differently. They have a different training history and training background. And obviously, you talked in reference to hockey, but what if one athlete also had a gymnastics background and they played lacrosse and they water ski in the summer times? I don't know if water skiing is a thing up in Canada. It's freaking cold up there. And then the other athlete, they've been chilling at home, iPad kid, and next thing you know, hey, I want to start training for hockey. Like, there's a huge difference in that athlete's movement vocabulary. And I think that having the understanding that we have to individualize our approach is absolutely essential. And on that notion as well, back to the long-term side of things, if you can watch an athlete develop over the course of literally a decade, you're right, you're going to know how they respond and how they react to things. And you kind of develop an individualized dose response relation for the athlete as it relates to exercise. It's the same way that an athlete going to a primary care doctor for sickness or illness or whatever they're going to see them for is going to get, prescribed different medications, and they're going to adjust those medications over time. They're going to find out what works best for that person. They don't necessarily dose everyone the same. Sometimes they have to give a little bit more. Sometimes they don't need as much, but they kind of figure out what works eventually to, cure whatever they're coming to see them for. And exercise is the same way. We kind of have to work and it occurs through trial and error for everyone. Some of us are just better at getting to the end result a little bit faster, but it's still trial and error at the end of the day. I don't think everyone has that magic formula figured out for what every athlete needs and how much and, how long they have to hold and so on that way. But I think in general, the more we can go about understanding that over time, we have to establish that dose response relation with exercise for what the athletes are doing, how much we need to give in order to see improvement, but what our ceiling effect is as well, to the point of, hey, if we go over this, bad things are going to happen. Because at the end of the day, we do need them to train hard. And training should be intense because hockey or whatever sport you're playing is very intense in nature. So if we are not loading you enough, we're doing you a disservice by inadequately preparing you for sport. But by the same token, if we do too much, then now training has taken over and sports are on the back burner, when in reality, all of these kids are training because of sport, not because they like training. So the more we can keep the main thing, and use training as a way to enhance sport and not detract from sport, the better our athletes are going to be long term.
Yeah. Well, you made a comment about the standard, right? The standard of care from the practitioner, the strength coach, whoever it is that's leading the process or leading the protocols. And I think that having a standard is hard, right? I mean, athletes, particularly young athletes, their job is to push boundaries, is to try and find shortcuts, is to try and, not do the stuff that maybe is too hard, even though it really needs to happen. So I think it comes down, and I give a shout out to all the strength coaches out there. Like this is hard work, right? Most strength coaches are doing it because they have a deep love of the game. And practitioners across the board, even PTs. I have some good colleagues of mine that are deeply rooted in the chiropractic dogma, but they're heavily slanted in the training milieu, and they really want to bring that experience in. And they do care. They have a high standard. And so they're swinging for the fences, if you will, for the athletes. And it's hard to have a standard when you have a large group of athletes and there's this different periodization of programming for athletes based on where they are, based on injuries, based on recovery. And so, for me, it's about being so connected and committed to the athletes that when I go into a training session, it's not just about like, hey, here's what's on the docket. Here we are, week 7. Here's we're past through our adaptation period. We're getting to some preparatory phases. I'm going to pay attention to the athlete. Like, what is he or she telling me in body language? It's the third day in a row they come in and they're like, first thing they do is like lay out on the turf and grab a foam roller and use it as a pillow because they're tired. It's like, okay, well, what's going on with you? Maybe there's some mental stressors going. Maybe there's some things going on. And to your point, yes, we have to push the athlete, but sometimes you can only stretch the elastic so far. Sometimes 9 times out of 10, the elastic can be pliable and have lots of range. Other days, it's just a slight pull and it comes apart. And so I think part of the standard is the discipline of coaches to stay connected to all the details of the physical aspect, but it's also about recognizing our athletes are people first, and that some days they need to have a conversation or have a discussion or at least entertain that maybe pushing the pedal to the metal isn't the right thing for today because there's some other anxiety, some other mental issue going on for them that is getting in the way of them performing. To me, that's the standardized vision that we have, is like, we're always looking at beyond the surface. What do we see? And then I come into your world. We talk about injuries, how often players that I can see their gait has changed, how they're squatting, how they're setting up for the bar, can see they're favoring something. The position of that front foot is slightly toed out. It's like, hey, what's going on there? It's like asking the questions. And a lot of athletes, they're going to say, no, I'm fine. No, I just got a little tweak. It's their famous word, a little tweak in the shoulder. Well, hold on a second. You're a baseball player. That's your throwing arm. Let's have a look at that. Let's see what's going on. And so it's about being attentive and aware versus putting a program on the wall and telling the 12 athletes that are walking through the room that are between 9 and 12 years of age, there's your program. Go hit it. You got 60 minutes to do it. The one who finishes first gets a lollipop or a high five or a gold star. And then they're going at it like a bat out of hell. Intensity's high, volume's high, but they're not making any progress. And in some cases, they're going backwards. So to me, standard is all of those things encompassed in one. And sometimes it's less about pushing hard and more about being aware of what they might need.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that goes back to the importance of having a relationship with the athletes that you work with. After all, I mean, if you're in this space, you're doing it to provide and serve athletes. So if you're not connecting with them and understanding them and their story and their background and their past experiences that way, then you're missing the boat on this one. And to your point on, when athletes come in and they're tired or they're sore or they're achy, like if you don't have those conversations with them, you're never going to know. And you're right, you're going to try and have them keep hammering. And then 5 years later, I'm going to end up seeing them walk in and they're going to tell me that they've had this issue for 5 years or 6 years. And they were always told, yeah, I was told to just keep pushing through it or just ignore it, or it's no big deal, or, well, the x-ray was clean, so there's nothing wrong and it's all in my head. When in reality, I see these things derailing kids' careers 5 to 10 years down the line because they were never properly addressed in the first place. So if nothing else, just have the conversation, right? You kind of mentioned before about how there's a time to purposely not carry the boats, and there's a time to actually rest and recover and let the body actually just kind of like not do what it's always done, in the sense of we don't need to always be redlining in sport and training and so on. That way we can actually have an easy day once in a while. And I kind of relate that to a podcast we did earlier this year with Rob Wilson, called the Check Engine Light that way, where essentially he kind of equates human performance to a car, and that every single day those athletes are going to come in and there might be little warning lights that pop up, little things to say, hey, check the engine or change this or whatever it is that way. Just something that tells us maybe we should look a little deeper before we proceed forward. And then for some reason, we just have a tendency to ignore those signs, ignore those things, and then question everything or blame everyone else because it's never our fault, right? We blame everyone else when the engine blows up one day. So we have to really be attentive to the athletes that we work with, understand what they're coming in with, have that relationship and trust and rapport already built so that they know when we kind of back them off that day, it's actually for their best interest in the long term, and not just, hey, look, you've been pushing hard, you need to take a day off. Because a lot of times people hear that day off or that rest day and they think, oh, they don't want me to be better. Well, this other guy's working, why am I not working? And we become so caught up in this concept of we need to work hard constantly that we forget that the body sometimes needs that chance to actually recover and rebuild after all the stressors that we've applied to it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a principle I teach called the system versus your process. And I teach players all the time, 90% of what happens in my world is the system. It's all the things outside of my control. It's in a hockey world or an athletic world, it's the officiating, right? It's the field you're on or the court you're on. It's all of the things. It's your teammate not having a great day. Like everything that I cannot physically go in and manage and alter is the system. It's a coach's decision where to play you, not to play you, to put you on the roster, not on the roster. Like it's endless. And then there's this little piece, 10% of the equation is called my process. And we all have one. And that's the only thing that I can control. It's the only thing that your viewers that truly can control. And what I say to players and what we teach is to get so good at your process, surround yourself with people that are equally committed to your process, that you nurture it. And some days the process, like a little baby, sometimes it needs to be nurtured and held and cared for. And other times it needs to be pushed. But unless we're willing to look at my performance that way, 90% out of my control, 10% in my control, if I'm not consciously choosing, most athletes will always rely on the system to dictate how they're doing, what they should be doing. So in the case of injuries, you hear Torrey Krug came out yesterday and he says 5 years ago, he fractured his ankle in the playoffs when he was in Boston. 5 years. He announced today that he's got to take the entire year off to finally have surgery on that ankle. And he acknowledges the last 5 years have been hell. He's tried everything he could to manage it because most athletes want to eliminate the risk, the fear of not playing and they'll do whatever they can because they're more committed to the system than they are to their process. And so I say to players all the time, when you get so good, and I'll go one step further. Some of the highest achieving players that I've had the privilege of helping from a very young age, Stanley Cup champions. I mean, I've lifted every major hockey trophy there is in the spectrum of hockey because I helped other people win them. The players that have achieved the most, they are impeccable at their process. It's the thing that, like, the boundaries are so firm. Most players don't even, when I ask them this, they're almost like, well, I don't know. I've never even thought about it. Like, what is in my process? And then we break down the steps. The players that achieve at the highest level, they're so good. They're so good at their process that they know it's literally the lifeline to everything that they do. And so when they walk into the gym and we talk to a player about HRV and we talk to them about their sleep, like, they're so cued in on their process. They know when they're ready to push and they know when they're ready to not. And they've got someone in their corner who's also respecting that process, who some days, like we said before, some days, okay, we're not carrying the boats, and other days you are, but we get to use that as a barometer based on the athlete's process, not on some system that we're creating that he or she is trying to compete with or compete against.
I love that point on having the differential between the system and the process. And that's something that I find a lot of athletes don't quite grasp at first, or, in reality, I think a lot of athletes just almost need like a wake-up call before they realize how important it is. So, for example, I haven't posted this on Instagram yet, but I will. I had an athlete who we tested on force plates last week and got his baseline data. And then this athlete comes in, missed an appointment because he was down sick. And then I retested him after being down sick for a couple days. Everything was down over 30%. Jump height was down. Braking numbers were down. Every kind of metric you can think of, everything got like blown to bits. But, they felt fine that day. It was just a couple days ago they were down bad because they were sick. But that day it's fine. So then it becomes a whole conversation about like, well, here's what we're going to do for today. But just understand, like, long term, like, you're going to get sick again. Different things are going to happen. Here's how we have to manage that. And I feel like that's something that everyone is trying to understand is how do I get athletes to realize developing a process is important, or having a process is important, and understanding that each athlete's process is going to look a little different, whether that's the music you listen to, whether you prefer to sit in the sauna or the cold tub, whatever it is, every athlete is going to have a different kind of process that they like. But I think the way I think about it in general, it's some kind of time intentionally every day away from screens of any kind. I don't care if it's iPhone, iPad, TV. Just take a couple minutes and actually get in tune with your body. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. Do something. I don't care what it is. Whether it's the cold plunge, the sauna, your massage gun, your foam roller, I don't care what it is. Just do something and then figure out how you feel afterwards. Test it out a little bit. See what difference it makes. And then repeat that every single day, because then you're actually taking time to become intentionally in tune with what your body's trying to tell you, but also intentionally in tune with, hey, I do this thing. I no longer feel this. I've addressed the problem, as opposed to, well, I read on Google that this is the best thing, so let me go throw these 10 things at it and never actually know which one you responded to, the best. Because like we mentioned before, every athlete is different. And if we're planning to individualize our training to them, they also need to understand that the process that they use to keep themselves in the game has to be individualized, and no one is going to know their body better than themselves at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Look, I say to players all the time when we get into this conversation about process versus system. And I say, there was a time when you were young, when you'd look out the window and you didn't have the faculties or the experience. What should you wear? Is it a raincoat? Is it an umbrella? Is it a winter coat? Is it boots? Is it flip-flop? Like, I don't know. Well, the ambient air will give you immediate feedback. Wow, too cold. Go back in, different shirt, different shoes, different pants. Well, what we want is for our athletes to be able to look out their metaphorical window of themselves, the same way you look out a window now, and recognize what is the environment telling you? And so what is my body telling me based on the environment around me? And if I go outside in a snowstorm with sandals and shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm a 17-year-old athlete, then that's on me. Maybe the coach didn't play me. Maybe he did. Maybe my skills were off. Maybe they weren't. I don't know. All those things may be true. But the fact is, I wasn't set up for an opportunity to win, like for me to win. So I say to players, if you're not able to do that scan of your body to check in, as you described, with the same level of clarity and ease that you can in looking out the window to decide what does the weather tell you on how you need to alter, change, show up, well, then you're probably going down a dark road with your eyes closed. And if things work out, my experience is they don't. But if they work out, it's by chance. It's luck. And I say to players all the time, the last thing you ever want to do is leave every part of your evolution and development opportunity up to Lady Luck, because Lady Luck and Father Time are always going to work against you. And so you want to keep them at bay. And the way you can do that is be so connected to your process that you are preparing yourself the best you can possibly be prepared. So in the event that Father Time and Mother Nature come and hit you, you're a lot more resilient and you can handle the pressures of the confines, and it doesn't change who you are as a person, doesn't change your process. It just has you augment, shift, jive, move based on your surrounding environment.
Yeah, exactly. Having the ability to kind of shift and adapt on the spot to what the athlete is feeling. And earlier you brought up ISOFIT, and obviously I'm probably a little bit biased on this, but this has actually been my real go-to for athletes when they're having one of those off days, because everything that I do with them, you can do yielding ISOs with it, but I just do overcoming with them. And then it's like, well, I know whatever resistance or force they're feeling is what they're producing. It's never any more. It's never any less. It's just Newton's third law applied to exercise. It's action, reaction into a fancy wall that you can move around a little bit, right? Like That's all it is. And athletes feel so much better afterwards. And I don't have to run the risk of beating them up or, run the risk of them getting injured when they're working with me. Because if there's one thing I found that doesn't look good, it's that when athletes are coming to PT to get better, and then they end up getting hurt worse working with you, that's really not a good look. And I think that there's this big misconception nowadays, and maybe I'm guilty of it myself. I really like to put high load through athletes, so much so that I have a little GIF and meme that I'll throw out there quite a bit that literally just says, load the sucker. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is there's more than one way to skin a cat here. You don't just have to throw someone under a heavy barbell and call that load. You can get incredibly high forces isometrically. I've been testing kids on the plates on the ISOFIT, and we're able to get 500, 600, 700 pounds of force through them at that 60-degree angle with just a thigh pull. So it's like, to me, I can get high force training in a very safe manner. And oh, by the way, it's building static stability, which is something I found a lot of these athletes lack. And I don't care what age group we're talking about, whether it's 13 or 23 or 33, a lot of them, I put them into certain positions and they don't know how to generate force there. And from my eyes, it's an absolute liability because they're going to be in those positions in sport. So if we can't do it in controlled, isolated environment, what's going to happen when they go out on the hockey pitch, which is very chaotic and loud, and they're called to do the same exact things? I don't think it's a recipe for success. And I think that the more we address some of those underlying static stability, demands that way, the better our athletes are going to be and the less injuries we're going to see, both on the sports side, but also on the training side of things. Because again, I don't think athletes should be hurt going in when working with a physio. Like, that should be our last, the thing that we want last. Like, we do not want that to happen at all, period.
Well, I mean, I'm incredibly biased around the ISOFIT, and both on a personal and a professional level. In 2019, I ruptured a full rupture of my quad tendon on a trampoline. And one of the practitioners I went to religiously was Brad. And I would drive down to his clinic and he would meet me 3 days a week. And I was still fully immobilized. I was 4 days post-surgery. I had 32 staples in my knee, but I was working on isometrics. I was doing abduction, adduction. I was doing small quad contractions isometrically while I'm in a full brace, fully immobilized. And that, along with a few other things that I did, within 4 weeks, I went back to my surgeon and he said, get this brace off. He goes, I've never seen someone recover at the pace that you recovered. And so, yes, I was doing isometrics with Brad. I was also doing isometrics 2 other times throughout the day. I had a protocol that I was following. And when I asked my doctor about isometrics, he said, "Oh, yeah, they're great. You should do them." And I said, "Well, why aren't you offering that as an option?" He says, "Well, because most people aren't going to do them and they don't really understand them." And so I remember thinking like, well, that's bizarre, because to me, it's the easiest thing to do. Is every boy, every man on the planet, has done this at some point in their life to flex their bicep. Okay, that's an isometric contraction. And the longer you hold it, the longer it takes mom and dad to look at you or your friends to notice your big bulging muscle, the longer you're going to hold it. And we all know the feeling of holding it so long, it's like starting to cramp. Okay, well, that's isometrics. Like, it worked to show your buddies your bicep. So that was my personal experience. Professionally, I mean, I've been doing isometrics for years. Even when we do some of our basic plyos, I say to players all the time, the whole purpose of jump training is the landing, is the point of stability, because everything, and I'm taking a page out of Brad's book here, but every move you make starts with 0 velocity. And so how quickly can you get to 0? And then how much force can you produce out of 0? That will dictate how powerful or how agile you are. And so when I see kids jumping, like they're like, bouncing, it's like, okay, well, you've got no control in your rhythm. You're all over the turf. Let's, as you said before, let's refine it. Let's make it very specific to how you're moving. And then that's when, the MSK, the mobile strength kit, I mean, we use it exclusively with our older guys. I have a player who's a 2002 birth year. He's a sophomore this year, a D1 school for hockey. And he's routinely pulling 34, 35, 3,600 Newtons on a mid-thigh pull. And all we do is isometric for his lower body power. And when his colleagues and friends say, well, like, how come, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not squatting 3 plates? And then he shows up to camp last year as a freshman, and he's the strongest, test over test on average. He's the strongest in camp. And so there's so much we can do. Again, it comes back to the standard of the practitioner. The machine itself isn't going to produce the results. It's how we use it, how we apply it, how you're describing, Dan. And we use that as a functional tool for all ages. And it's amazing how many kids can't do a proper hip hinge, either through a squat or a deadlift. It's incredible. Some of these kids are 16, 17 years old. They're telling me they're pulling 300, 315 pounds on a trap bar in gym class, and they can't even do a hip hinge. They'll say, "Oh no, I'm going to show you." I'm like, "No, please God, don't show me." Because if that's how you can hip hinge in an isometric squat or deadlift after 11, 12 seconds, you don't have the stability to hold that posture. I don't want to see you pull 300 pounds. Like, do that somewhere else. We're going to spend time. But this is when, back to what we said before, right? This is the process. So now little Johnny, who in his mind is as strong as Bobby doing 3 plates, but I'm saying to Johnny, no, you're not going over there. We're just going to spend time. When you can do a 60-second or 75-second or 90-second hip hinge here in this controlled environment isometrically, then we can start looking at, to use your words, then we're going to worry about loading you up. But you're not ready for that, even though you're same age and all those other factors. And some athletes don't want to come back. If they're with a team, they want to go train somewhere else because somewhere else is allowing them to do what they want to do. But last I checked, I need to be the most educated person in the room. If the athletes are more educated than the trainer or have more control in the room of the trainer, then you need a new trainer. You need a new strength coach. Our job is to make sure that we have boundaries set in place. And then based on what we see, how we see the athlete perform, we find a solution that fits them. And that's, again, I'm biased with the ISOFIT because we use that religiously with all of our movements, all of our function. It's incredible once the players understand how it works. Yeah, their minds are blown and how quickly their strength improves and how much they can outperform a lot of their peers.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the gains made through isometrics are neural driven. And I think that's something a lot of strength coaches don't understand. And we miss the boat on that in the sports rehab world a lot of times too, is we think that everything has to be bigger and faster and stronger. When in reality, I think a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times I see athletes that they have the horsepower, they just don't know how to use it. They've got the engine from a Dodge Ram, but they're stuck in a Prius. And it's like, how do we kind of move that back into the Dodge Ram that way, right? So understanding that a lot of these different things are more driven by mechanisms that we might not often think about. It's not as easy as just throwing another 45 on the bar. But, the last I checked, working with athletes is complex. Sports are complex. Athletes are complex. It changes every time you see them. So we're trying to find simple solutions to complex problems, and we can only go so far with that. There's a certain point where you can't simplify things anymore, and you have to understand that you have to get into the complexities of why certain training styles are good and why certain ones are not, and why certain athletes respond well and why other ones don't. You have to be willing to dig in deep, as you mentioned before, and be the most educated person in the room. And I'll take it a step further and say that doesn't just apply to the training room that way. That applies to your cohort and colleagues that way. I like to say that I'm the dumbest one in my little group. And I say that because I'm trying to surround myself with people who are ridiculously smart and they know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they've done it for years, sometimes longer than I've been alive. Those are the kinds of people we want to learn from. We don't want to learn from the guy who just started out last month, but don't worry, he just grew to 200,000 on Instagram overnight because, he got this viral Instagram sensation that he's training now. We want to be around people who are actually producing the results and have been in the trenches for a long freaking time. And the more we do that as a, collective sports performance, sports rehab setting, the better our athletes are going to do, but the better we're going to become as well. And the more we raise the standard ourselves, the more we're all collectively going to get better.
Yeah, look, it blows me away. I've got some of those friends too that are big Instagram followers, and look, I've got Instagram envy. I'm working to grow my Instagram too, and I'm ambitious about serving and helping an audience. At the same time, I always chuckle when I see strength coaches, hide their secret sauce, like as if someone hasn't thought about it or someone else isn't doing it, and maybe someone else isn't doing LMNOP, maybe they're doing ABZ, like they're doing a different variation. But can we not get to a point where, as you said, that as a collective of practitioners, of leaders in this space, that we can link arms and have meaningful conversation? I learn from you, you learn from me, because the more knowledge I can acquire, the more I can then share, the more I can serve. And I'm constantly giving shout outs to our athletes. When I learn something from a colleague, I'll come in and say, hey, Tyler, we're going to try this with you. And JP, we're going to do this with you because such and such person gave me some insight. I want to try it with you. Let's see how it feels. And I'm constantly reaching out to other strength coaches, guys that come back from NHL teams. I'm saying to them, give me your strength coach's number. Oh, what do you want to call him for? Well, because he's a colleague of mine. You're under my care. And so I'm calling these guys and we're having meaningful conversation. I'm like, what do you see? What do you know? What is this athlete not telling me that you see? And so, yeah, I just think we do such a disservice when we try and hide what we think is the good stuff away from the rest of the world because we think we're the only one using it. Yeah, it's a lose-lose proposition. So I'm grateful to hear you say that you're out there pining for more information and surrounding yourself with people to gather more, because it's the only way that I get better as a business owner and as a practitioner and as a leader of not only our athletes, but our team of trainers, is that I continue to grow and get better. Tony Robbins said it once. He said, you're either growing or you're dying. And I look at that in terms of knowledge, like I'm constantly thirsty to learn more so that I can continue to share more and help. I'm growing, my athletes are growing. The moment I start regressing and dying, there's no way that I'm going to be able to help my athletes at the level that I believe I can. But that goes back to what I said at the start, Dan, is having a standard as a strength coach is really, really hard. It's not a 9 to 5, turn off the lights, go home and skip through the rain showers. It's like constantly consuming. I mean, I'm surrounded by books. I'm constantly digging for more knowledge and thirsty for more, because I believe it's my job to inherently do that so that I can serve our audience.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so interesting to bring that up, because I think a lot of people get into this profession thinking it's going to be easy to work with athletes and they're just going to figure it out. And it's like, newsflash, you got another thing coming, because like we mentioned, everything changes all the time. and you have to be constantly working to try and stay as up to date as you can. And I think that if you're in this for the light workload, the easy life, whatever you want to call it that way, you're really choosing the wrong profession. And I think that any college strength coach out there would probably agree with me, because they put in a lot of hours, and you have to respect the grind and the hustle and the passion of people like that. Because, the athletes are certainly passionate about what they're doing. They're willing to put the time in. How come we as a profession are not that way? And going back to the isometrics for a second, we've seen coaches program isometrics for decades, centuries, even longer, right? Like, how many athletes have ever done a plank, right? Like, even coaches that have no training experience know what a plank is. How come we have not, as a collective, moved to applying the plank, one of the most common exercises ever, to every other movement or every other muscle group in the body? Why have we just left it isolated as the core and said, hey, core is important, we're going to train that isometrically, but everything else we're going to forget about the isos? It just doesn't make sense. So the more that we kind of dive into that and question things and evolve our process, the better our athletes are going to be. Because I'll make a bold claim and say that ISOFIT has been a game changer, and it's amazing, but we're just scratching the surface of what that product, or products I should say, can actually do in the athlete and performance world. And I think in 3 to 5 years, the understanding that we have around that is going to be incredibly different and more advanced and evolved. And we're going to be able to apply that with athletes in ways that we never would have thought of right now.
Yeah, I think the challenge, bold statement, but I think some of it is ignorance. I think a lot of strength coaches are, caught up in their way and their dogma. And so deviating, changing from that is not something they want to do, which I get it, right? Change sometimes is a challenge. But I say to colleagues all the time, just let's talk basic physiology. Like, let's talk about attachment points. Let's talk about tendons. Let's talk about insertion. Like, let's just look at the mechanics of a squat. What's involved? And so show me an isotonic movement, and then let's look at an isometric movement, and let's break them down. And I can show you, we can show each other, we can agree that the function, the mechanics are identical, and there's an upside to doing isometric. So maybe you don't want to abandon your isotonic movements entirely. Maybe you're in love with the squat rack, and then you're gonna, when you're on your tombstone, you want a squat rack and a barbell. Awesome. I'm with you. I love it. But let's not discount these other pieces, because if we do, then our ignorance is leading the way, and then that's not in the best service of the athletes. And I say to my colleagues, look, if you can define to me why the isometric is not the right move, then I'm all ears too. But I haven't had anybody that's been able to sit down, anybody that I trust that has a good understanding of anatomy and physiology, that can explain to me that isometrics are not good, and that there's a significant preference in an isotonic move. I haven't found that person. I mean, again, I'm like I said before, I'm always learning, I'm always asking, but there's an alignment that the isometrics are good. And I had a strength coach a couple of weeks ago, and he said, no, he goes, because the range of motion through a squat, he was talking about squat and a deadlift. He was saying the range of motion, the multi-muscle, multi-joint movement in that compound movement, it's the full range of motion that an athlete experiences. I said, well, we can adjust the position of the ISOFIT so that you're still addressing all of those biomechanical and muscular movements. We can do the same thing. It's just not happening it's not happening, concentrically. We're breaking it down, which, okay, debate whether that's good or not. But what he likes to do is to do a squat and then do a pause and control the pace of the eccentric and concentric loads. And then I said, well, when you're at a squat, when you're in the deepest position of the squat, whichever is your preference, and you're asking the athlete to hold it, do you not understand that that's isometrics? He's like, well, yeah, isometric works, but it's got to be part of the whole equation. And again, it just comes back to what we said about standard. Is like, listen, there's lots of ways to skin the cat. You said it at the outset. And all I'm saying is, let's look at all the different ways. And at the very least, let's sprinkle in some of these other things to try them periodically to see what type of results we get. But some people are just more comfortable with a bar on their back because that measurement of the weight they're pushing or loading, it means something to them. And sometimes people get caught up in the numbers, but yeah, we're so ecstatic with what we're doing with the ISOFIT, and it's the performance benefits are speaking for themselves.
What's been your approach to, you mentioned earlier about how sometimes athletes will, maybe they go to a different place to train because they're going to let them, quote unquote, do what they want to do. And that's, squat 405 for reps until their back gives out or something like that. Or maybe the parents say, hey, I know you know what you're doing, but when I was in school, I used to do crunches and bench press and curls, and that was strength and conditioning. So what's your approach to managing this like whole concept of misconceptions around strength and conditioning, or, managing the athlete or parent who doesn't quite understand the approach and what we're doing and why we're doing it, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot on both ends of the spectrum, right? We get the parents that are saying, hey, he or she needs to push more. And then we have the younger kids that say, oh, no, they can't do any strength training at all. Meanwhile, they're doing plyos and all this craziness. So I do two things. I listen. I want to listen and hear what's their experience and what do they want to achieve. And then I, in layman's, I explain to them how the body works. I explain how when you're in the hockey spectrum, what's happening in the lower extremities and how mechanics of a stride, how important they are, that strength and balance is the front foot and then extension is on the back foot. And so I first, I understand them. I get them to kind of see the movement outside of the gym, how much weight they're doing. And then sometimes what I do, if the athlete is there, I'll always get them, I'll give them a movement to do. You and I were talking before. I say to parents all the time, like, can your son or daughter do a full body squat with full thoracic extension? And they're like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, put your arms above your head, and can you squat down with both palms of your hands facing in the same the wall that your chest is facing in? And most players can't. And I say, so that's more important to me than how much weight your son or daughter has on the bar. So let me show you how we do that and how we work on it. And so I don't discount what they're doing. I get that they're set in their ways, but I also just shine light on some other things and point to some gaps or some areas that maybe they have a deficiency in, and show them how we can color in, we got a magic marker. We can color in that gap that they're missing, and that at the very least we can become a complement to the thing that they're doing. And I'm not suggesting it's all or nothing, like them or us. It's like finding some sort of happy medium, just purely from an education standpoint, so that they understand that there are some other tools at play that can offer incredible benefit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's where it all comes back to, is just that process of understanding and recognizing what people might know and what people might not know. And that goes for us ourselves too, is we constantly have to be looking in the mirror and recognizing our own strengths and weaknesses and understanding what we know and what we don't know. And I've had times where I'll be talking with parents, and sometimes they ask a question and it's like, you know what, I hadn't thought about that before and I actually don't have an answer to it. But it's not okay to stay there. You have to be willing to go out and, as we talked about before, put the extra time in and gain the knowledge and insight to actually answer the question. And if you don't know, then keep working until you figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, then that's when, as we mentioned before, you go to your awesome network of colleagues that you've built over this past several years, and you say, hey, look, who can help me out here, because I can't make heads or tails of this. And I think the more we kind of like rinse, wash, and repeat that process, the better we all become. And again, the better the standard of strength and conditioning and sports performance as a whole becomes. Because I think, as we mentioned, there's a lot of groups out there that I see that I just kind of shake my head at, but there's also a lot of groups that are doing really, really good work. And I think that the more we see the ones doing really, really good work, and the more we raise that bar, the better off all of our athletes are going to be. And hopefully we actually put my PT clinic out of business, because I'll be honest, I'm tired of seeing athletes come in with injuries. And I think that eventually we can actually crack the code and reduce a lot of these injuries and reduce the rates of a number of them. But we're not there yet. But I think we'll eventually get to that point where we collectively have such an advanced knowledge and understanding, from taking the work that guys like you do, working with athletes for decades, and combining that with all these other knowledge and insights that we've been able to gain and learn over the past several years, especially on the sports science side of things, and hopefully prevent a lot of these kids from getting hurt, because some of them get hurt and they don't come back, whether it's a lack of drive or lack of motivation, or if it's just been the straw that breaks the camel's back or whatever it is. That way, there's a number that face injuries and then just don't recover from it. And I think if we can prevent that entirely in the first place, then we're in a much better place.
Yeah. And it's back to what you were saying before, something that you said, it kind of triggered it, is that, when parents, sometimes it's players, but sometimes parents, they're talking about moving volume, right? Moving lots of weight. I'll often ask them, like, why? Like, why is squatting 315 more important than 225? Why is squatting 405 more important than 350? Like, again, and I have no attachment to the answer. I'm asking, like, I want to understand, because the truth is, strength is relative, and it's only as powerful as the weakest link. And so what I believe is one of my jobs is to find those links. Even the athletes that we're training, like, I'm looking, where is that breakdown going to happen? Because if a player is skating as much as they are, and sometimes the conversation is not just about training, like in the gym, in the formal setting with us, but it's about what they're doing on the ice. You talked about neurological. I mean, our central nervous system is pretty darn frail when we're throwing more at the athlete. And so sometimes I'll say to a parent, like, skating 4 hours a day, week over week, or day over day, week over week is not the right answer. It's not going to get you the result. And so for me, it's about understanding through the parent's lens or the player's lens, why does that number matter? And then tie it back to the ISOFIT. I say, if you think pushing 100% is required, parent says to me, well, 405 is my son's PR. I want a higher PR. So, okay. So if that's your barometer, do you realize that if that's his PR, if he's going to try for a second rep, and he can get through that his ATP, like, he doesn't have the same amount of force. So there's something that is now within his system that is starting to just move that bar up. 405 is no longer his max. It's some other percentage, because his ATP, his CP has dropped. He doesn't have the same strength that he had on his first rep. And I said, why I love the ISOFIT is that an athlete can push at 100%, and we're never putting them at risk of doing more than they're capable of doing. And sometimes expressing it that way to parents around injuries, because labrum and tear is the real thing. And kids that overuse or misuse, especially in the hockey spectrum, they see Sidney Crosby with a huge posterior chain. Yeah, it's taken a long time, and some of that's genetics. And so you're not going to get that by squatting 405. Let's try something different to get some power and to be able to produce more power on the ice, but do it in a way that's safe, so you're not on a surgeon's table at the age of 17 or 18 or 20. And for a lot of players, if that happens, yeah, it can have dire consequences to your long-term career opportunities playing the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. And to your point on the squat example, I mean, say you have that athlete who's at 405 and you get his one rep max up to 415. Okay, you're up 10 pounds, but what difference does that make? Does that immediately make you a better hockey player? Does that immediately make all the scouts and coaches turn their heads and say, wait, who's that kid? His squat just went up 10 pounds. Does that really change the game that much? Or is it just, well, we put 10 pounds more on the bar and we're able to move it? What
Right.
impact does it have? And I think that a lot of times athletes and parents don't often think about that. And it's just kind of that concept of having a deeper understanding of, like, what is it that we're actually doing and trying to achieve? Because, a lot of times, like I mentioned before with the plates, like, I've kind of abandoned largely the rep max testing. And I'd rather just throw someone on force plates and see what kind of numbers we can get, because I think it's a little bit safer than, hey, we're going to try and put as much weight on the bar as possible and see if you can handle it or not. Because what if you can't, right? Like I said before, the last thing I want is someone injured in training that way or in rehab that way. So if I can throw them on the plates and just have them show me what their body is capable of instead of trial by fire, I just think it's a much better and safer way. And I can certainly tell you the difference that 1,000 newtons force into the ground is going to have. But, just because we increase our squat doesn't actually mean that we're going to see a huge change in force into the ground. And at the end of the day, pretty much every sport, whether it's hockey or tennis or whatever that way, it's all about the force you push into the ground. Very few sports are played open chain, at least in the traditional sports sense. So if we can push more force into the ground, we're going to be a better athlete.
Yeah, I remember physics in grade 10. I didn't have a very compelling physics teacher, but I do remember one of the things he taught that stuck with me is, speed is force over time. And so when parents ask me now, they say, like, we want to get faster. We're going to run. We're going to sprint more. And I said, okay, well, turnover rate is a thing, but you also have to be producing. Like, there needs to be some horsepower in the engine. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to produce a lot of force to move in that direction. And so often with the younger kids, so we'll talk about, you talked about the 405 and 415. It's like, just because a kid can kind of muscle through something doesn't mean that the kinetic chain is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so we'll talk with younger kids and parents about, like, don't worry about the weight. We'll get there at some point down the road. Let's just start building some strength, some closed chain movement, body weight, gravity, and let's start producing more strength, because that's going to help you produce more power. That's going to help you be faster. We call it building the engines. Let's build those engines so you've actually got some horsepower in there, and you're not just, running, cadence over cadence, just thinking that you're moving faster when really you're not. You're just working harder.
It's amazing how many athletes can actually squat or deadlift so much, yet not understand the concept of putting force into the ground through the foot.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's crazy. It's so crazy to me how they move the weight, but the force, where does it go? Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you talk about squats. I think bench is another one, right? Like every guy wants to get into the 2-plate club, right? They want to be squatting 2 plate or benching 2 plates. And, I say to the guys, look, I'm not going to lock the doors and chain the bars up. But you come in, you got some extra time. You want to go do a couple sets of bench, like, go nuts. But it's not a part of our program. And whether you can bench 2 plates or you can't, who cares? I can guarantee you 100%, 2 plates or not 2 plates, it's not going to change you as a hockey player. In fact, it might hurt you, because if you're moving that weight just for the sake of moving it, there's lots that could be happening in a mechanical function of your shoulder that may not be good long term. But I'm not going to come in and hide in your basement and make sure you don't touch dad's old weight set. But yeah, that would the bench press, like in 98 when I started training players, it was like, am I going to have a 6-pack, and how much can I bench? And I'm amazed I still got those questions now, almost 30 years later. So we're making some strides in evolution, but in some ways, some things stay the same.
No, definitely, Dan. I feel like we could both probably talk about this all day long until we're blue in the face. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything we missed as we talked about, training and development in, the modern day athlete, I guess I'll call it?
Yeah, I would say, what I talked about earlier, because I talk about it endlessly with our athletes, is get so good at your process. Don't worry about the system, the level. We had one of the NHL guys was in this summer training, and he turned to all the younger guys and he said, there's no such thing as the way. Every player, and this guy won a Norris Trophy. He's in the league, I think 21 years now. He played in Minnesota, played in San Jose. Now he's in Carolina. Brent Burns is his name. I started working with Brent when he was 12 or 13. And he said it to the guys, he goes, there's no such thing as the way. It's find your way. And that anchors right back into the process. And it's like, get so good. Like look under every metaphorical rock along your path, what you eat, like the quality of the food you eat. One bad meal is a bad meal. Like it's a bad meal. One bad tank full of gas is if you're a high performance vehicle, is a bad tank full of gas. It can have detrimental impact on your power output. Your sleeping patterns, like you talked about, the mindfulness, the meditation. Like, are you, if you're a cold plunger or you're a cold shower or you're a sauna, like, are you doing those things? Do you have the discipline to make your process a priority. Go there first. Talk to a strength coach. Have someone who really challenge them to explain to you why you're doing this versus something different, and be open to recognizing that, you know, you have a responsibility to yourself. Yes, you got great coaches and people around you to guide you, but at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to manage your process for the rest of your life. Hopefully you live 100 more years. And so get really, really, really good at that. And if you're lost, if you're not really sure what that means, you're having a hard time connecting the dots, reach out to me, NTC Hockey on all the platforms. On my personal, Dan W. Blackburn, you can find me on IG. We're super active on there, happy to help and guide and lead, whatever that looks like, whether that's remotely or in person. But I would say in the high performance world, it's so competitive. It's such a narrow margin between them and you. You can't control what they do, but you can control what you do. So make that be your scientific project that you're going to get so good at that nothing is going to deviate or change from what you know is important to you, and you stay on it like a dog on a bone. And I guarantee amazing things are going to happen and incredible opportunities are going to come your way.
Yeah, no, I love that. I completely agree. And we'll link to all of your social platforms in the description below too. That way, if you didn't quite catch that, you can just click there and check out everything Dan and NTC Hockey is doing. Dan, this has been really awesome. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate all the knowledge and insights that you shared with us today. Thank you, man.
Yeah, buddy, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having me on.